President Trump's policies are slammed as an Islamic State propaganda opportunity, according to Britain's Home Secretary. That's as the U.S. now finds itself named among Europe's external threats. 4 U.S. states start a legal challenge to Trump's travel ban, but a new poll finds many Americans actually agree with the so-called extreme vetting of newcomers. Ukraine's defense ministry admits the army is conducting an offensive against rebel positions in the east of the country. You're watching RT International, coming to you live from Moscow. I'm Marina Joshi. Donald Trump's only helping Islamic State with his travel ban, and that's the view of the UK Home Secretary Amber Rudd.
It is divisive and wrong. ISIL and Daesh will use any opportunity they can to make difficulties, to create the environment that they want, to radicalise people, to bring them over to their side. So it is a propaganda opportunity for them, potentially.
The Home Secretary's words come as angry rhetoric in the UK continues to rise against the new U.S. administration, as Laura Smith now reports.
What we're seeing here in the UK is anti-Trump sentiment really intensifying, both on the streets and in Parliament. On the 20th of February, we know that British MPs will debate Trump's visit to the UK, and it's no ordinary visit. It's a state visit, which will be hosted by the Queen, and it's usually not accorded to world leaders until they've been in office for a little while. A petition's been set up on the Parliament website, which has now attracted nearly 1.8 million signatures, and that means it has to be debated. And here's a taster of what that debate might include from Serial's straight-talking MP Dennis Skinner.
Will the Foreign Secretary, just for a moment, try to recall, along with me, as I hid underneath the stairs when 2 fascist dictators, Mussolini and Hitler, were raining bombs on towns and cities in Britain. Now this government's hand in hand with another fascist, Trump.
So that's in Parliament, but it's on the street too. We've seen mass protests this week against Trump's visit, and specifically against the refugee ban in the US. There were several thousand people out in London on Monday night, 3,000 in Manchester and in a number of other cities.
Criticism of the new U.S. president has been mounting among EU politicians, too. The European Council President Donald Tusk even named the U.S. a new threat to the bloc, along with Russia, China, and radical Islam.
Today we are dealing with threats which have previously not occurred, and increasingly, let's call it assertive China, especially on the seas, Russia's aggressive policy towards Ukraine and its neighbors, wars, terror and anarchy in the Middle East and in Africa, with radical Islam playing a major role, as well as worrying declarations by the new American administration, all make our future highly unpredictable.
They're panicking. Not only Mr. Tusk, who is appalled, by the way, and of course who puts Russia among the enemies. If Europe is disintegrating, which is unfortunately reality, it's not because of Mr. Trump. It's not because of ISIS. It's because the Europeans don't believe in it anymore, and that they don't deliver a good work, neither in Parliament, nor the Council, nor the European Commission. That's clear to all now. I mean, we could see the end of the euro this year, and we blame Donald Trump. I mean, this is ridiculous.
4 U.S. states have started legal action over President Trump's executive order on immigration. It comes amid more nationwide demonstrations against the policy. Legislators in California are taking the dissent a step further by trying to turn the entire state into a haven for illegal migrants. And they're pushing for a bill that would establish a sanctuary for over 2 million people already living in California without authorization. The move against Trump's order has even been supported by hundreds of U.S. State Department officials who signed a dissent memo. And there have also been open calls for protest.
The American public is energized to speak out against the abuses of this administration. What we've got to do is fight in Congress, fight in the courts, fight in the streets.
However, it's not clear how many will follow the senator's advice. A new poll by Reuters indicates Americans remain highly divided over the issue. Well, nearly 50% of those surveyed say they agree with temporary restrictions, with 41% against it. But questions are now being raised over the way some news outlets have reported the poll. The conservative news website Breitbart has accused Reuters of trying to downplay the support for Trump's policy, saying a headline summarizing the poll was misleading, as it stated only a third of Americans think the travel ban will make them safer. Trump's entry restrictions are not the first time foreigners have been limited from entering the United States. However, it's only now the measures are facing a widespread backlash, as RT's Ganit Shikan now reports.
U.S. authorities before Trump were hardly blind to nationality or religion. The profiling, though, took different forms. Recently published internal FBI guidelines show that the authorities have for years taken factors like race, religion, and nationality into account in their investigations. Many have argued that the number of refugees that the Obama administration accepted from Iraq, Libya, and Syria was disproportionate to the level of intervention by the U.S. in those countries. And in the relatively small numbers of admitted refugees, some saw a form of hidden profiling.
It shows that the people, and I think a lot of the spin from the media, is okay with whatever a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress does. Under the Obama administration, so much was ignored, whether it be foreign policy, domestic policy, a lot of their spying, a lot of their treatment of the press. So much of that was completely ignored by the public. But now that it's a Republican and the media is on the Democrat side, and the Democrats have a lot more of these like activists in major cities, it's coming more to light, because how dare Donald Trump not even continue the policies, but function under the policies that were established under Democrats.
Back in 2011, President Obama severely restricted the number of refugees from Iraq for 6 months. At the time, the decision provoked little to no outcry.
Actually, I have heard that, and I'm wondering why we also didn't hear more about that. But maybe I'm not as aware now. I think I'm a little bit more aware about what's going on. I think I'm following more news now because I'm really afraid what's going to happen to people, and I'm really afraid what's going to happen to my friends.
And why we'd single out the Iraqis over anybody else didn't make much sense to me at that time either. You know, walk around D.C., there's plenty of Iraqi, Iranians, Muslims, there's everybody here.
Many say Trump's decision was a step too far. The question is whether it's just the scale of the action that should determine public outcry, or whether any act perceived as profiling needs to be opposed. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chakyan, RT.
With the travel ban in place, many media outlets are concerning themselves over whether the stars of the Oscar-nominated White Helmets documentary will be able to attend the ceremony. The film, which focuses on the work of the controversial Syrian humanitarian group, received an Academy nomination several weeks ago. But under the new immigration rules, 2 members of the group may be restricted from entering the U.S. One of them is the group's leader, Raed Saleh. However, it turns out he'd previously been denied entry into the U.S. back in April last year. He'd arrived in Washington, D.C., but was reportedly sent back to Turkey because his visa had been canceled, and that's despite it being valid until September of 2016. Well, not everyone is against the new travel restrictions. Some in the Arab world even back it too. The foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates has rejected claims Trump's move is anti-Muslim and stated the countries on the list indeed have problems that need to be worked on.
موجه ضد ديانة معينة.
It's the right of all sovereign nations to take their own decisions, and the US is not an exception here. There are attempts to give the impression that this decision is directed against a particular religion. But what proves this talk to be incorrect, first, is what the US administration itself says. And second, that not all Muslim countries are included on this travel restriction order. And we're sure that it is a temporary measure, which is to be revised in 3 months. Some of the countries from this list are indeed facing challenges, which they have to overcome to improve relations with the US.
U.S. Democrat leader Nancy Pelosi lashed out at the Trump administration's handling of the conflict in Yemen. And that's after a Yemeni refugee told the tragic story of her family on CNN.
My dad passed away because we didn't have any medicine back then in Yemen because of the siege.
Sorry.
And my mom is now recently living in a destroyed house because of the airstrikes.
Your family is suffering because our president is reckless, and his administration is incompetent.
It was an hour-long Q&A session on CNN with Nancy Pelosi answering a range of questions from audience members. And this particular question from this young woman, this Yemeni refugee, has gained a lot of attention, in which she described how her family has been torn apart. And Pelosi clearly didn't hold back in her response, but she really exclusively honed in on just the aspect of this young woman's mother and how she's now stranded in Yemen because of Donald Trump's order to ban people from entering. But like I said, she didn't hold back. She called this new administration's move reckless and incompetent. But what she didn't respond to was what was really at the crux of this young girl's question, which is how the crisis in her country has torn her family and any number of families apart. And this is not something that would be out of Pelosi's jurisdiction or awareness to comment on. That's because the US has played quite a central role in the Yemeni crisis, and that's because they've provided billions of dollars worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia in its campaign in the country. Everything from battle tanks to combat ships to missile air defense systems. In fact, in the past 8 years, under President Obama's tenure, 42 separate deals were either made or proposed with Saudi Arabia. That's totaling some $150 billion. So while Nancy Pelosi really honed in on Donald Trump's hand in this girl's heartbreaking predicament she finds herself in, she really failed to target the bigger picture, which is the girl's real issue, which is, of course, the previous US administration's hand in the continuing crisis in her country.
Former MI5 officer Annie Machon believes Obama's supporters are simply trying to protect his legacy.
It was a shameless bit of politicking, basically. You know, she avoided the actual question. It's a very political response. And she just seized the chance to put the boot in. And I think we're going to see this from Trump's adversaries within the administration and the Senate and Congress, taking this tactic time and time again. Just to go back to the concept as well of what Obama has done by supplying Saudi Arabia, by allowing the Saudis to wage a proxy war over the last 8 years. Of course, this is why Yemen is in such a mess. This is precisely why the country is on its knees. I think they're probably just trying to protect their reputation, protect the legacy as much as they can, but it's really way too little and way too late.
Now, after a short break, we'll report on the evacuation of illegal West Bank outposts by Israeli forces. Do stay with us.
People with stories to tell. Those who deserve to be heard. Studied inside out, but still with unrevealed secrets. Leaders, politicians, thinkers, and witnesses. They're here to speak. Are you there to hear?
They're the war hawks selling you on the idea that dropping bombs brings peace, to the chicken hawks forcing you to fight in the battles that they start.
The news hawks try to tell you that celebrity gossip and tabloid murder trials are the most important news of the day. While the hawks of advertising tell you that you are not cool enough unless you buy their product.
Watching the hawks. Watching the hawks. These are the hawks that we, along with our audience, will be watching.
Welcome back. You're watching RT International. Hundreds of Israeli security forces have begun the evacuation of the largest illegal outpost in the West Bank. Around 600 settlers are protesting against the tearing down of the settlement and are refusing to leave. For more on that, I'm now joined live from Tel Aviv by independent journalist Anna Brightman. Anna, thanks so much for joining us here. So do tell us what's going on. Describe the situation to us.
The evacuation of the controversial Jewish settlement Amona began this morning. Thousands of police have been reported to arrive at the illegal outpost. It's a week ahead of the Supreme Court deadline ordering its destruction. A handful of families have voluntarily left at this point, and there have been minor clashes. Latest reports are saying 13 police officers have been injured and 20 people arrested. Amona's evacuation is an issue that has been going on for years, and in 2006, also on February 1st, police demolished 9 homes, setting off violent confrontations between authorities and settlers. A police spokesperson said the Israeli police will strive to carry out the evacuation without the use of force, as is customary, to the extent that violence is not used against police. Leaders from political parties from both Israel's right and left have expressed sympathy for the residents being evacuated from Amona, but that sympathy is tempered with warnings to refrain from violence and adhere to the law. The government released a statement late last night in which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman announced the creation of an additional 3,000 settlement homes in the West Bank. The move is perceived to be an attempt to appease the government's right-wing base, which is against the evacuation. Israeli security officials said they hope to see Amona evacuated by the end of the evening, but it seems unlikely, and the situation could continue until tomorrow. The longer the situation continues, the more the fears of violence grow.
Right, and thanks so much for bringing this whole situation to us into the context. Anna Brightman from Tel Aviv. Meantime, Ukrainian authorities have admitted they are conducting an offensive in the east. A long-term military conflict in Ukraine between government forces and rebels has reignited in the past few days, with heavy shelling resuming in the residential areas of Donetsk, as well as neighboring Makeyevka and Avdiivka. And here are the latest images from the front line. Now, shelling has reportedly left a number of civilians dead, with Kyiv also admitting its soldiers have been killed in the fighting. RT's correspondent Maria Finoshna has more on the situation.
The news about the fighting resumed in eastern Ukraine came as a big surprise. The clashes restarted amidst ceasefire reached 2 years ago. It brought relative tranquility and peace to the region. And now this is what we hear from Ukraine's military officials about the situation on the ground.
Step by step, our boys have heroically moved forward. But what aim could the aggressor have? The aggressor's aim is to get back to its previous position.
It is hard to say who is to blame for the escalation, but what is clear moving forward that Ukraine's military has just mentioned would be the direct violation of the Minsk agreement. According to the peace deal, heavy weaponry would be moved 15 kilometers from the front line on each side, effectively creating a vast 30-kilometer buffer zone. No moving forward is allowed. No moving forward is supposed, according to this deal brokered by Russia, France, Germany. It was a big deal. It was an international effort to bring peace to Ukraine, and it was violated by these actions. Plus, the Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister mentioned aggressor, apparently referring to anti-government forces. On Tuesday, RT's journalist was caught in the shelling while filming on the territory controlled by anti-government forces. So it is clear they were not shelling at themselves, but rather the other side was attacking. Russia is very concerned about the situation in Ukraine. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has talked about dangerous escalation and dangerous provocation that would jeopardize the peace in the region. Let's now take a listen.
Everyone knows who creates a deadlock situation in Ukraine, and the latest provocations by the Kiev regime over the last few days have once again proved it. Even the very biased German media, I believe the Süddeutsche Zeitung, has accepted that Poroshenko is behind all of this. And it's very important for him to escalate the situation so that Ukraine won't be forgotten.
Again, it is hard to say exactly what happened and who started it, but definitely what we witness is a dangerous escalation in Ukraine that would threaten peace in the region.
Now, the renewed fighting has already been condemned by a number of countries within the EU, while the United Nations has voiced concern. John Laughlin from the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation believes the timing of Kiev's latest offensive is significant.
The escalation of violence was started by the Ukrainian side in order to derail the rapprochement between America and Russia, because ever since the Ukraine conflict started in 2014, the West, the Americans and the Europeans have all blamed Russia for it, and they've all said that Russia needs to respect the Minsk agreements. They never put sanctions against Kiev for not respecting the Minsk agreements, only against Moscow. So it's absolutely obvious that Kiev has an interest in escalating the situation and in doing everything to make sure that it is difficult for President Trump to do what he says he wants to do, which is to ally with Russia.
A Russian swimmer and Rio silver medalist Yulia Yefimova has spoken about the recent doping scandal surrounding Russian athletes, claiming the whole thing's been politicized. She made headlines after her fellow competitors gave her a hard time in Rio. Some booed the swimmer and others called her a cheat, claiming she was part of a Russian state-sponsored doping program.
You wave your #1 finger and you've been caught drug cheating. I'm not a fan.
I think Lily is right. I think something needs to be done.
Cheaters are cheaters. Yefimova has tested positive 5 times, and she's gotten away with it again. That's just not fair on the rest of the athletes who are clean.
While her time in Rio was tough, her road to the Olympics was not exactly plain sailing either. Yefimova is a 4-time world champion. Back in 2013, she was found guilty of doping and was suspended for 16 months. She was banned from the Rio Olympics after failing a drugs test for a newly banned drug. But she appealed and was cleared to compete just a day before the Games opened. RT talked to Yulia Yefimova about the scandal surrounding Russian athletes.
He said he was no longer allowed to coach me. He did not have this problem with any other guys, just me. I was hurt by his decision. I'm afraid that if I move somewhere for a new coach, there will be sanctions again, and I will be on my own. I don't want that to happen. I don't need another coach telling me 6 months before the Olympics that he can no longer work with me. It was scary. That's not how we were raised. We were taught to believe that sport must be separate from politics. But still, considering all I've gone through, I don't know how I managed to get even that far. Maybe I was just so angry that it helped me. Maybe I was trying to prove something to somebody, to myself, to the whole world. It felt like it was me against the world, and that was really hard. There are people in every country who take performance enhancers. Usually, when they expose 1 or 2, they simply turn a blind eye to it. But with Russia, it's different. We are under some kind of political pressure. We simply found ourselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, so they let the hounds loose on us and started accusing Russian athletes of all sorts of things. But if we take another country and do the exact same investigation there, I'm absolutely sure we will find the same results. To anyone still thinking it wasn't political, here's why it was. When there are violations, you can always come to some agreement. For example, you can suspend the athlete. But in the case of our Paralympians, who were absolutely clean and had no history of violations, they were all banned. All of them. I recently had surgery, and they were supposed to administer a certain drug during it. The doctors insisted because I needed it to get better. After all I went through, I am overly cautious. I don't take anything. So they asked me, what if it's life or death? And I said, I don't care. I'm not going to take anything. There's a huge amount of paperwork, and it all has to be filled out correctly, because if we don't, it creates additional problems. I really don't know how it works. What if I get into a car accident? Does it mean they will ban me right away? It's all really quite scary.
And an interview with Scotland's former First Minister Alex Salmond is coming up next in Going Underground. Do stay with us.